Welcome everyone to the SHERA program overview training for the resident service coordinators. Thank you all for attending today. We know you're busy and we appreciate you making the time to join us. So we're going to give everybody a few minutes to get logged in. Um, and while everyone is getting logged in, settled in, I'd like to just take a few minutes to walk through a few of the housekeeping items for how we can engage during this training. If any point throughout today's session you have any questions, please send those to the Q&A. You see those at the bottom that you can request through Q&A. We do have designated times throughout the session for questions, and we are using the Q&A functionality during the times that we've designated for those questions. And if we don't get to everyone's questions during the session, we will make sure to get back to you, and we will be updating frequently asked questions. So I want to let you know that today's call is being recorded. If you object to being recorded, please disconnect from the session and reach out to us so that we can work out another way for you to get this information. But we are recording. We're going to give it a few more minutes because some folks are still getting logged in. Okay, so we are going to get started. And again, I'm just reminding you, we are being recorded. I am Chris DeVore, and I'm one of the facilitators for this, and Myrna D. Rodriguez is the other facilitator that will be joining us. We're both in the Bureau of Housing Management at DHCD, and DHCD has been receiving training support from Accenture, which is a consulting group, and they've been involved in the from the beginning with the SHERA process, and they have been supporting us. So before we begin and actually start going through all of the materials, I just wanted to take a few seconds to have I'm sorry, I'm we already did that slide and we didn't have that slide. So these are the steps that we will go through today. So we'll have training goals and objectives, the SHERA program overview, the eligibility, the rollout and tenant journey, the required documentation, communicating with the tenants, and then at the end, frequently asked questions and resources and questions from you. So we'll start by reviewing the new subsidized housing emergency rental assistance program, which is referred to as SHERA, as I've been referring to it in the past few slides, and provide you with an understanding of the program and the policies. The goal is to provide guidance to better support tenants who are eligible for the SHERA program and whose public or local housing authorities are applying on their behalf. This is open to both federal and state public housing tenants. And so let's talk about the SHERA overview. So this program, the SHERA program, is a federally funded emergency housing assistance programs for renters living in public housing and affordable housing who are impacted by COVID-19. It helps residents clear rent arrearages that are during the period April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 21. And this is for arrearages that were unpaid back rent. It's only for rent. And again, it's that period April 1, 2020 to March 31st, 21. Housing authorities, both public and local housing authorities, are able to apply for assistance for these arrearages on behalf of their income eligible residents. Um, next. So the program is for property owners, property management network to help residents pay for COVID related rent arrearages um, during that period of April of 20 to March 31 of 21. It's an owner-based online process to apply on behalf of multiple residents in a single application. Owner-based is the housing authority is the owner. Take advantage of it's also to allow taking advantage of the compliance work already done by owners in subsidized housing, which refers to the income certifications that have already been done by housing authorities. It builds on owners' pledge of working with tenants to divert eviction due to rent arrearages and to support existing emergency rental assistance delivery system. And owners will continue to refer tenants to the RAAs for utilities, moving expenses, and stipends if applicable. The SHERA program is only for rent. It is not for utilities or moving expenses or stipends. Um, so the SHERA program is designed to be messed up here, a qualification between the state of Massachusetts and qualifying owners with income-based rental assistance programs. So what this means is that owners will apply on behalf of the tenants. Um, the housing authority will be completing most of the paperwork needed to receive these funds on behalf of those tenants. The tenants have to sign a certification that says that they're giving the housing authority permission to apply for the emergency rental assistance to clear their rent arrearages during the eligible period of time. It does not cover anything prior to the eligible period of time. If the application is approved, the back rent that the tenant owns up to 12 months will be paid. And if the application is approved by the housing authority, they agree to provide the tenant with protection against eviction going forward. This means including suspension of evictions and they will not initiate any new evictions for non-payment of rent for at least 6 months. Okay, to roll out the SHERA program, there was a soft launch, the pilot, uh, and pilot members applied through the system. It was a volunteer owner group that was included private owners and public owners, and it was also based on geographic area and property type, so that we got a diverse population or property types that were part of the pilot. We will be opening the program to other owner groups in phases. Phase 1 will be to mass housing and MHP Bauer relationship properties. Phase 2 will be to the housing authority portfolios and DHCD subsidized portfolio. And phase 3 will be to 40B and 40R properties not included in the 2 previous groups.
So this is Myrna. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And we're going to talk about eligibility. So eligibility. For a household to be eligible for assistance through SHERA, the following criteria must be met. One, I'm sorry, rental arrears must be between April 1, 2020 and March 31, 2021. Anything prior to that date of April 1 is not eligible. The household has experienced a financial hardship due to COVID-19. The owner can demonstrate that the renter household has eligible rental arrearage. And again, those have to be as of April 1, 2020 through March 31, 2021. And you'll hear that repeated many times. And also the household has an income at or below 80% of area median income. Both public and local housing authorities are eligible, and their state and federal properties are eligible. Next slide. So the SHERA rollout and tenant journey. So we're going to take some time to try to explain what this journey looks like in this slide. So this slide outlines the process that tenants, households can generally expect to follow in this journey if they are eligible and their property owner is participating in the SHERA program. So first, the tenant household will receive communication about the SHERA program and a packet of information, which includes an overview of the program. It includes tenant frequently asked questions, and it'll include required documentation checklists and other housing assistant resources. It will also, the landlords will then gather application materials, and these application materials should include the signed SHERA tenant certification form, the last 4 digits of the social security number, if the tenant has one, they should provide the last 4 digits, and other income documentation if applicable. Once the landlord has this, the landlord will submit the application on the SHERA portal and communicate with the tenants that they have done so. Once the SHERA applications have been received, they will be reviewed. They will be either approved or denied, and such approvals and denials will be communicated to the tenant households. In addition to the notification from the landlord, the SHERA portal will also send a payment notification to tenants as an extra validation. The next slide. So information for tenants. So throughout the process of applying for SHERA, tenants should complete the following steps and can expect to receive the following notification. So the steps for tenants. So one of the steps is that the tenants should work with their landlords to make sure they are income eligible. 2, they need to make sure that they complete and sign the tenant certification. They must certify financial hardship if they have been impacted through COVID, whether it's direct or indirect. They need to have a request for assistance. They need to agree that they will have no duplication of benefits. In other words, they cannot be applying to another funding for the same benefit. And they have to give permission to your landlord to apply on your behalf. So in this funding process, it is the landlord who will apply for the tenant. In addition to those steps, the tenant can expect communication from their property owners regarding the documentation they need to apply, the documentations or the documents that they need to apply, the confirmation of applications submitted. They will be communicated if the landlord needs additional information or documents, and they will be notified if their application has been approved and a payment to the tenant's account is being made, or if the application is being denied. Next slide.
Okay, and now we're going to talk about the required documentation. Next slide. So housing authorities are required to maintain a file for each tenant household that includes identification for the head of household, the last four digits of the head of household social security number. If the head of household does not have a social security number, that's fine. There is no requirement for a social security number. Um, but if they have one, we're asking that it be provided. The social security number, having it or not having it, has no impact. There's no requirement on immigration status, and it doesn't affect any eligibility for this program or for public housing for that, for state public housing. Um, we need verification of current housing. So the lease, we have leases and lease addendums. Some people refer to it as a tenancy agreement. Tenant certification of rental assistance eligibility, and documentation of qualified rent arrearage is owed between April 1st and March 21st of 31st of 21, and verification of income and leases, the lease with the that were effective during this rental assistance program. It may be a lease addendum, but it would be the lease. And the verification of income is most likely already available at the housing authority. They have it on file because they've done a rent recertification. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So um, the income certification document is the latest or the most recent income certification. So housing authorities received waivers on having to conduct rent recertifications in the year 2020. Some housing authorities took advantage of it, some didn't. Both the state and HUD gave these waivers, and the housing authority can use the 2019 um, income certification for the purpose of this program. Again, the qualification is that the person has to be under 80% of AMI in order to be eligible, which 98% of the residents of public housing are under 100% are under generally. Um, there might be a couple of percentage that are over that, but so the tenant certification, which is signed by the head of household, states that they were impacted by COVID-19, that they're not receiving any other assistance for rent arrearage repayment, and that they're giving permission to the owner to apply on their behalf for this assistance and what the assistance amount is. Um, the other requirements, as we spoke about in the previous slide, is the social security number, which isn't required. If they have it, please provide it. And then there's demographic data that is being requested that is required by the Treasury that we collect. Next slide. So state public housing tenants are required to report an increase of 10% or more of their monthly income by the seventh day of the month following the increase. And federal public housing tenants are required to report increases in income based on housing authority policy. So housing authorities would have to look at their existing policies to determine when that increase in reported income should have happened. The reference for the state program is in 760 CMR 6, specifically 6045AB. So LHAs will conduct a rent determination for tenants who didn't report a change in income and retroactively charge or change the tenant's rent to the first day of the second month of the increase. And the reason we're doing this, we are encouraging tenants that didn't come in and report an increase to now come in and report that increase, because that retroactive amount that may be due or is due may be eligible for rental assistance payments through the SHERA program. So it is important for the resident to come in now. We are hearing from housing authorities that as they're doing their annual redeterminations this year, that they are finding that there was unreported income. And it is resulting in retroactive amounts that need to be back to the authority. So this is really important that if a tenant has a situation that they come in and report it so that the funds can be requested through the SHERA program. So increased income could be a result of unemployment income, federal pandemic unemployment income, which was for state programs was counted as income. Whether they may have had new employment or increased work hours, and DHC guidance on and federal enhanced unemployment income is generally countable, as I just said, as income for purposes of rent determination. Next slide, please. So this is the tenant certification of rental assistance eligibility that they will be asked to complete. Um, so it has a lot of the data points that may not be in the Housing Authority's tenant management system. Um, Things such as language proficiency, gender, race and ethnicity, method of communication that is preferred. This certification also requires that the tenant attest that they are a resident of the unit and that they were directly or indirectly impacted by COVID-19. This does not necessarily mean that they got the virus, but that their life was impacted. For instance, job loss, hours cut, taking care of family members, other expenses that they normally didn't have that were required because everybody was home, and COVID related expenses, children doing schooling from home, that kind of thing. Tenants will be asked to specify the months for which they owe rent and provide the total dollar amount of arrearages they owe. The tenants must certify that they are not receiving any other government assistance for the same rental arrearages that the SHERA application is covering, and they will have to sign the form. Next slide. Communicating with tenants. We'll walk through some of the frequently asked questions relating to SHERA.
So now that we have understand what the documents that are required, we're going to talk about the outreach letter that will be sent to the tenants. So local housing authorities should identify eligible tenants and distribute the SHERA outreach letter to tenants, including the SHERA tenant overview reference guide to all tenants with eligible arrearages. So the outreach letter explains the SHERA program, the eligibility requirements, and how to apply for assistance. The next slide. Public housing authorities or local housing authorities should notify tenant households on the application of the following. So tenants should receive a notice about when the application has been submitted. If they need additional documents, they will notify the tenants that they need additional documents, and that's if this is applicable to them. Application approval and payment to tenant account. They should receive a notice that the payment was made, and it must be specify the dollar amount of rental arrearages for that the application was made for, the amount of reimbursement that the housing authority has received, and the months for which the payment has been applied to the tenant's account. And tenants should be also notified if there was a denial. And if that happens, then DHCD will provide the denial letter. And there is, and they should look at the SHERA portal for notification to tenants and instructions and form letters. So public housing and local housing authorities who determine at the pre-application stage that a tenant is ineligible to apply for SHERA are expected to work with tenants who ask for a review of ineligibility determinations. So they must notify the tenant immediately. The PLHA must accept the tenant household self-attestation of financial hardship due to COVID-19. They must immediately notify the tenant of the reasons for ineligibility by sending a SHERA tenant ineligible notice. This notice will provide the tenant with the opportunity to ask the owner for an administrative review in writing within 15 calendar days. The landlord must conduct an administrative review. Once the PLHA receives this request within those 15 days, the PLHA must designate someone who did not make the initial determination to review all submitted documentation to determine whether the tenant is eligible for SHERA within 15 calendar days of receiving this request. The public housing authorities are also expected to work with the residents if they have been denied and if they have been denied their eligibility. If the LHA determines the tenant is eligible for SHERA, the LHA must submit an application on behalf of the tenant through the SHERA portal to notify the tenant of the application submission and to continue with the SHERA claim process on behalf of the tenant. If the LHA confirms that the tenant is ineligible for SHERA, the LHA must notify the tenant of the decision. In the redetermination notice, the LHA must include both a statement encouraging the tenant to notify the LHA of any changed circumstances in the future in case the tenant may then be eligible for SHERA, and a listing of available rental assistance resources, including information on the no-cost community mediation program. Next slide. SHERA frequently asked questions.
Okay, so we're going to go over some of the questions that are asked. And first one, what should I do if I have already applied to another emergency rental assistance program like RAFT through a local regional administering agency? If you've already applied for RAFT or another type of emergency rental assistance and your application is still pending, you should continue with the application and not move forward with SHERA. If a tenant previously received RAFT, IRMA, or ERAP and still has unpaid rent due from April 1st of 20 to March 31st of 21, they should participate in SHERA. How can I certify that I have experienced a financial hardship caused by COVID-19? You can certify that you have experienced a financial hardship caused by COVID-19 by signing the tenant certification. This letter also says you have not applied for or received emergency rental assistance benefits from any other public source for the same time period for which SHERA funds are being requested, and you give permission to your landlord, in this case the housing authority, to apply for SHERA on your behalf and share the information necessary to do so. Do I need a Social Security number to be eligible for SHERA? No, the SHERA program does not have an immigration status requirement. Households may be found eligible regardless of immigration status. DHCD has to report aggregate information only and not individual tenants. So tenant's demographic information. If you have a Social Security number, you must provide the last 4 digits. And please note that the last 4 of the Social Security number is provided only to check that your assistance is not already being processed through other programs. Can I apply for rent stipends, prospective rent, utility payments, or moving costs? And you can't do this through SHERA, not through SHERA. You may contact a regional administering agency to determine your eligibility for assistance for rent stipends, utility payments, and moving costs. If your rent does not change, if your rent does not change, if your income changes, these agencies can determine your eligibility for up to 3 months of future rent. If your rent changes based on changes to your income, such as Section 8 MRVP, you are not eligible for any months of future rent, including first month's rent. What if my landlord does not think I am eligible? If your landlord does not believe you are eligible for SHERA, they can provide you with information about other resources for emergency rental assistance. Landlord must accept the self-certification of COVID impact. If the owner finds the tenant ineligible, the owner must provide an opportunity for an administrative review conducted by a staff person that did not make the initial determination. So just to reiterate, the landlord and the owner is the public housing agency. When should I expect my rent arrearage to be cleared? It may take several weeks for your application to be approved or denied. If it is approved, funds will be paid to your landlord, who must use the funds to clear your rent arrearage within 30 days after receiving the payment and send you a receipt of the payment. Slide. So resources and next steps. So let's do some reminders and some next steps here. For additional resources, these are a list of where you can find additional resources. And the document, you can go into these links and review the documents. There's a SHERA policy and program overview, which provides an overview, it's kind of self-explanatory. The SHERA Housing Authority outreach letter, it's a sample letter that can be used to engage tenants. And COVID Housing Help website includes information regarding emergency rental assistance resources during COVID-19. There's a tenant overview reference guide that provides information on the SHERA program and frequently asked questions for tenants. And there's also talking points for housing authorities and managers. This document provides high-level talking points for managers about the programs to the tenants. We'll open it up for questions. There are some questions in the Q&A.
Yep, thanks, Chris. Thanks to both our speakers today. Before we dive into the Q&A, would you mind explaining what the role of the resident services coordinators are in this year program?
Sure. So the way that the resident service coordinator, because you work with the residents, you can assist the housing authority in outreach to the residents, explaining the program, or if residents have questions about the letter that they receive or the informational packet that they receive from the housing authority, you will be in a position to help. We suggest that you communicate with the executive director of the housing authority to define, a specific role, if there is a specific role that they want you to be part of through this process. Some housing authorities, the program, housing authorities have the option to participate or not participate in the program. So you need to make sure that your housing authority is participating in the program before you begin to speak with any residents about the SHERA program. You can also help to inform them about other avenues for rearages that they have, or utility payments that they may have, other costs that they can't cover. And it really is a support to the executive directors because of your direct contact with the tenants.
Thanks, Chris. So I see a question in the chat. It states that if rent was modified, can a tenant still apply for this benefit?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, sorry about that. The question is, if rent was modified, can tenants still apply for this benefit?
They can apply for the benefit as long as there is an arrearage that has not been paid during the period of April 1st of 20 to March 31st of 21. It's only for that period.
Thank you. So the next question is, must all tenants be notified even if they do not have a balance, but might have unreported income that would generate an arrearage?
So the letter that is going out to residents does speak about their arrearage, and there's also information in it that if the resident has unreported income, to come in and do that. So we are anticipating that the letter would go out, or there may be a second letter, a different letter that goes to residents that don't have arrearages but may have unreported income. But a letter should be going out to all residents.
Thank you. This next question is, do residents have to submit documentation to prove that their arrearages are COVID-19 related? Does the LHA have to do any type of third-party verification of such hardships?
No. The tenant has to certify that they were affected by COVID-19, and the housing authority will accept that certification.
Great. The next question is, I have seen many wrapped applications denied due to the applicant not having sufficient documentation of financial hardship. Will SHERA require any documentation of financial hardship besides the signed document from the tenant?
No, this is that is one of the major differences between SHERA and RAFT. That the housing authority will gather all the documentation for the resident or from the resident, and they will have already the rent certifications on file showing the income and the arrearages. So there, as long as the tenant has the certification, is under 80% of AMI, and has arrearages during that period, it should go forward for consideration.
Great. So this next question is related to utilities, and we might have to take it offline, but I'll read it in case someone has an answer. So utility payments, our clients are running into a catch-22 because in order to access RAP funds, the REAs are requiring a shut-off notice. But due to the moratorium, no shut-off notices are being issued.
I don't have an answer to that because I'm not familiar with the program. So maybe we could take it offline and respond to it separately.
All right, thanks. This next question is, how soon can we start sending these letters notifying tenants about the SHERA program?
Once you're able to register, and housing authorities cannot register at this time, but once they're notified that they can, the certification letters, the notification letters can go out. Does anybody have anything else to add to that? Could they actually
So I think
start before that?
because I think we've learned from the pilot. This is Ben Stone. I think as we've learned from the pilot owners, it does take some time to do this outreach and gather these 10 certifications. So if a housing authority knows it's going to join when available, you could theoretically start sending these letters now. You just wouldn't have set dates on when the payments would go through. Aviva, Chris, anything to add to that? Because we just know it takes time. And you'd obviously want to confirm with your leadership that you do plan to participate. But given that, you could start outreach now.
Yeah. So, but as Ben said, you want to check and make sure that that you have a conversation with the executive director about the program, or what the plan is based on their timeline.
But just to reinforce, you don't have to wait to actually register
Right.
in order to start working with your tenants, because we know that can take a while.
Thanks, Chris and Ben. So the next question is, when will LHAs know when they may apply to participate? Is there a limitation as to how many referrals each LHA may submit?
Housing authorities will be notified by notice, most likely through constant contact, um, of the date that they are able to register. We're anticipating late May, um, early June. And there is no limitation on how many claims on behalf of tenants that you can submit. It's anybody that has an arrearage and is eligible during that period of time. Um, and the application, though, with the claims on it, does come in by individual property. So you would be filing for each the residents or tenants of each property.
So this next question is there a max amount of money that a tenant can apply for?
There is not. It's based on what their arrearage is. Um, so it's whatever the total arrearage is for April 1st, 20 to March 31st of 21. And then if it is over a certain amount, we will look at it, and possibly ask some questions of the housing authority for further documentation.
Thank you. The next question is, when can private owners of affordable housing subsidized by HUD or DHCD register for SHERA? Will they fall under the PLHA, though, through which the subsidies flow?
I can answer that one. So I can't say exactly. It depends on your exact circumstances, when you're going to be invited to join. If you're funded through Mass Housing and MHP, you would be in phase 1, which would actually be ahead of the housing authorities. In terms of the subsidy flowing through the PLHA, no, you should still apply on your own. It's kind of a property-based program. Whoever is owning and managing the property should apply on behalf of those tenants. Did that answer the question?
Yep, I think so. If not, feel free to ask again in the chat for clarification. And we can move to the next question. When can private owners of affordable housing subsidize? Oh, sorry, we just read that one. The next question is, when does the program end?
We don't know yet. We have to start it first. Sorry, that's a glib answer, but we're not sure. There's not a deadline on the claims at this point.
I have a question. I think it was answered in the chat. Will retroactive rent qualify for payment? And if so, how far back?
So retroactive rent is covered if in fact it was during that period. The key to all of this is that the rearages have to be for the period April 1st of 2020 to March 31st of 21. So, if a resident didn't pay in April, May, and June, and then they paid, and then they didn't pay in January, February, March, all of those months are covered. Anything outside of that 12-month period, though, is not covered.
And that's based off the federal enabling legislation on the April 1st, 2020. They only made this rental assistance available for the COVID period.
Thanks for that additional clarification. Any other questions that we can answer today?
So we do have additional time if there are additional questions. But
yeah, I just saw one come through the chat. I'm not sure that this was already answered, but does unemployment count as income?
Yes, it does. For unemployment applies yes, straight unemployment is income. The enhanced unemployment is counted for state public housing tenants, and it is not counted for federal public housing tenants.
Yep, so will the slides be provided? Yes, the slides will be provided after the session, and they'll be available on the SHERA portal.
So where you would view all this is on it. It's the address is a sherafunding.mass.gov. I also don't think that when we were talking about the forms for the residents, which it does say here on the slide, but everything has been, all the letters and notifications have been translated into several languages: Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Chinese, Vietnamese, Khmer, and Russian. Okay.
So someone would like you to repeat what was said about the stimulus unemployment between the difference between the state and federal.
All right. So the stimulus checks are not counted either by the state or federal for rent purposes for tenants. The enhanced unemployment, the $600 per week or the $300 per week, that is counted as income for state public housing tenants. It is not counted as income for federal public housing tenants.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions or items you would like us to provide some more clarification on?
Okay. So just another note that, somebody asked, or you asked me to explain what the RSC's role is. It is you're being we provide this training because we're hoping and wanting you to be a support to the housing authority and to the residents, but we're not asking you to send out any of this documentation or be the lead person on this unless your executive director asks you to do some of this work. But it truly is a support work. You're very important to these programs because of your interaction with residents. And we want to make sure that anybody that's eligible to have rent arrearages covered does get the opportunity to apply. All right.
There's a question around contact information if we have any questions going forward. Chris, would you like to speak to the portal? Actually, I can drop the link in. So if you have any questions, you can submit them. I'll drop the link into the chat room where you can submit those questions. Any other questions?
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to, come to this presentation, and I want to thank you in advance for your help with the program. And we are available, or the questions can go into the link for the portal if you have further questions. So thank you again, and we're waiting for the post to go in, and then we'll be okay to close the meeting.
Oh, I dropped it in as an answer to the question. I can put it into the chat as well.